And this is the second night in our webinar series. Last night we had Ms. McFarland and Joe, who is here. Hang on here, I got some more admitting to do. There we go. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the speakers that are coming up here later, but this goes on. December 19th, we have the Assistant Park Superintendent talking about the park on the 19th. And Mary Blaisdell will be talking about planning a Wabakimi trip on January 16th. Julie Bourne, who I've misspelled her name, from Ontario Nature, will be here on the 30th. And we also have on the call, Gary Racy, who's going to be talking about caribou on February 13th. I'm looking forward to that one. And then I'm going to end up the series with retracing the 1784 voyage of Edward Umfield, EV or EU as I called him. But really what we're talking about here is protecting that route, working with Ontario Nature to figure out how to protect that route, because a lot of it is not in protected status. But tonight we're going to have, we were going to have John Holmes. There's some question whether his power is going to come on, so we may go to Rob Klavins first. That's John. John has done a lot of trips. He's probably done almost 30 trips into the Wabakimi region. Rob Klavins, I did not have one of your photos, but I do have a bit of your trip report showing the Beckwith cabin on Best Island, which is one of my goals to go see. We also have Jeff and Julie Dano. They'll be here a little bit later. And maybe if Dave and if there's enough time, Dave and his daughter will do a brief presentation on one of their programs. John and Rob will share their stories of paddling solo. Jeff and Julie paddle from road to road, and Dave and his daughter came in from the Trail Lake Road and came out on the railroad. So we got a variety of trips here. Very quickly, and Dave can jump in here, we are still, we're almost done fundraising, to be real honest. One of our projects in cooperation with the park staff was to do a kiosk. This was a week ago, and I think we're pretty much past that and real close to getting to our point of success. Dave will talk about that a little bit more. If you want more information about what we're raising money for, that is on our website, but it's a kiosk. There's lots of good reasons why we were doing it, and we had the ability for Canadian donors to do it, send it directly to Ontario Parks, which would give them the tax credit. So if you want more information on that, you can go to our website. That's all there. I'm going to stop sharing here. And Dave, I'm going to let you take it. It looks like John is not here, and probably you want to hand this off to Rob, but I'll let you have the field and I'll be quiet.
Okay, well, Rob Klavins, my fellow Oregonian, so you ought to know there's at least one other person who's tripping in Wabakimi from Oregon. Is Oregon is field coordinator, Northeast Oregon field coordinator for Oregon Wild, and his wife and him have a bed and breakfast in Enterprise, Oregon. And I think this was Rob's first trip to Wabakimi. So Rob, we'll just let you take it away as long as your voice holds out.
Yeah, which I apologize for. My Portland Timbers were in the MLS Cup last night, and we're devastated to lose, but I also lost my voice in the process. So I'll do my best. And let me just share the screen here.
Timberwolves.
And can you see that?
Yes, very good.
So yeah, so thanks. My name is Rob Klavins, and I actually live in Wallowa County, which is the very northeastern part of Oregon. It's a pretty remote place, and at the risk of being prideful, I put this photo in of our farm at the base of the Wallowa Mountains and the Eagle Cap Wilderness, not just as a shameless plug, but just to put on the record that my baseline for what I think a soul-stirring landscape is pretty solid. It's also the homeland of the Nez Perce tribe, and you can see why they never willingly gave it up. As Dave mentioned, my wife and I have a working farm and bed and breakfast, and my main job is as an advocate and organizer for Oregon Wild, a state-based conservation group where I work on wildlife and public lands policy and protection. Before I get into my trip, I wanted to give a shout out to the Friends of Wabakimi and folks like Bruce Heyer and everyone who's worked to protect the values of Wabakimi Provincial Park and other places like it. From my work, I know that lines on a map matter a lot. I know those lines shouldn't be taken for granted, and I know that there aren't very many protected places that got that way without a big fight against powerful interests. And those lines just constantly have to be defended. Since we can't all be lucky enough to have that as our 9 to 5, you know, if you're watching this and have enjoyed Wabakimi, you've probably spent time and money getting to these places and enjoying them. And so I wasn't asked to say this, but I hope you'll all consider making a meaningful contribution of your time and money as well, for the folks doing the good work. So I'll get off my soapbox and give a little bit more background on how it is that I found myself in Wabakimi and giving this presentation. I grew up just outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where my family, we love the outdoors. My dad in particular gave me the bug. We weren't big wilderness explorer types, but I always found that I was happiest when I was outside, and our regular trips to northern Minnesota are some of my most really treasured memories. I was a bit of a troubled teen, and as I went through some of those struggles, there was a clear correlation between how much time I spent outside with how well I did in school and my general well-being. And I also credit a trip to the North Woods and reading Sigurd Olson's book, Reflections of the North Country, for inspiring some changes that put me on a path to become the person that I am today. So finally in 2003, and I remember, because Johnny Cash died while I was in the woods, I took my first foray into the Boundary Waters proper. And I've been pleased to go back a few times since, including this most recent trip with my wife way too late in October a couple of years ago. Like a lot of people from across all around the country and the planet, this last summer was pretty miserable. I'm lucky to have a good amount of vacation time, but I ended up wishing most of it away during a summer of unprecedented heat and never-ending smoke. So I decided I had to escape it and began to plan a trip to go to the Boundary Waters, where I had no doubt it would be smoke and fire free. Little did I know that, as you guys all likely know now, the Boundary Waters followed suit with Quetico by shutting down due to fire. So I began to look north and got enamored of Woodland Caribou Provincial Park before realizing it too had been shut down. And there were even fires on Isle Royale. I thought about giving up, but then Albert at Gold Seekers Outfitters in Red Lake told me to check out Wabakimi Outfitters and Bruce Heyer in Armstrong. Excuse me. It didn't take a lot to sell me, but after a few YouTube videos, Google searches and whatnot, I reached out to Bruce and he told me he could set me up. Serendipitously, I also began reading up on Wabakimi on the Boundary Waters forum, and in a really uncharacteristic move for me, I emailed a guy named Oregon Dave, who was posting about a trip around the same time as mine, and that turned out to be Dave McTeague, who gave me some really helpful advice and assured me I'd be in good hands with Bruce and Margaret. Before I left, the Boundary Waters did open up, but I kept my plans for Wabakimi, and as soon as I crossed the border, I gave up those permits. All right, so the trip. This was my first ever solo and my first wilderness canoe trip outside the Boundary Waters. So as Joe pointed out last week, I'm glad I used an outfitter. In addition to not having to lug gear across the country, it's just nice to have that expertise for things like route planning and have the peace of mind that I couldn't have had any other way. Also, I'm a fan of spending money in rural places, trying to support sustainable, non-extractive economies. So I flew into Duluth, spent the night in Thunder Bay, stopping at a couple nostalgic spots along the way, and then headed to Armstrong. And since I didn't see a lot of wildlife on my actual canoe trip, the critter highlight was just about 25 kilometers south of Armstrong, where I got a nice look at a wolf on the road before it went off into the forest. So I hope you'll forgive the crudeness of this map. I haven't yet gotten my subscription to Paddle Planner, but the red lines here are the boundaries of Wabakimi. The pink is my route, and the purple circles are the campsites I used. Coupling some of Dave's ideas with Bruce's suggestion, we planned a 10-day paddle starting at the Shawanabis Lake outpost. From there, I'd go a little bit upstream on the Lookout River before backtracking and then heading into the Kopka. There were a few side options for side trips, and ultimately I went upstream one day on the Kopka to Hook Lake, where I had a layover day before heading downstream through the really spectacular Kopka Falls area. I called it audible and took out a day early from Mcgotti Lake. The trip was fantastic. I didn't see anybody from after the put in until the takeout. The fishing was great. The scenery, the solitude were really soul restorative. And the experience was just wonderful. There were a few challenges, and I would suggest that this trip probably isn't for a first timer or somebody who isn't reasonably fit and sure-footed, and certainly not as a solo. One of the nice things about Bruce's setup at Wabakimi Outfitters is that you can stay overnight and be well fed. It didn't appear that there were many open services in Armstrong when I was there, so I was glad to have taken them up on that offering. Another nice thing was catching walleye right off the dock where we met our plane. And we took a short flight, this group, to Shawanabis outpost, and then parted ways. The flight was fun, and while I don't want to dwell here, I do want to note that, you know, seeing these active clear cuts all around the park was a really good reminder, again, to not take places like Wabakimi for granted. So two folks, Terry and Grayson, went south on the Kopka from here on a 5-day paddle. We've since been in touch, and they reported that they felt that they should have probably taken more than 5 days, and that the portages were a little strenuous for them. They were experienced and seemed fit, so I would take that into consideration. I went north, where the first portage was not a particularly romantic, and it was a somewhat challenging crossing of a railroad, up and down some very steep, loose rocks, and it was the only time I triple portaged because it was that difficult. There was also a downed log, but it sounds like that's going to get cleaned up, or already has been. Demonstrating how good the fishing was, I spent just a few minutes and caught some eater-sized walleye before heading upstream. I managed to make a really ridiculous navigation error that I don't understand to this day, but I did it. So I stopped one campsite short of my intended goal with one additional portage to get there. As with all but the causeway and one other portage until the falls, it was in really good shape and not particularly remarkable, which is to say the portages were in good shape. This site had some really nice broad falls where I caught 2 big pike, went to bed. And that was probably a bit too much paddling for day one. I woke up in just excruciating pain a few times from using muscles that I just don't use in my daily life. But glad to report that that was a one night only phenomenon. I got some sunshine in the morning and began heading back to Shawanabis. Did not take long for it to rain, and rain and rain, and it mostly poured all day. It was also extremely windy, but the wind was at my back, so I made good time and ended up calling it a day at the south end of Shawanabis Lake. Along the way, it was kind of fun. Got to wave at the occupants of the outpost, who again would be the last folks that I would see until Vincent the takeout. And I should note here that when Bruce told me don't get hit by a train, I thought that that was pretty unlikely and mostly a joke. But I did have a pretty close encounter. I'm glad that I looked both ways because while the train is loud when it's there, as it approaches, it is shockingly quiet and fast. So if you cross the railroad tracks, look both ways. So with the wind at my back, I made it back. I made it to a campsite that Bruce had rated as world class at the southeast part of Shawanabis Lake. Didn't get to enjoy it too much because of the weather, but it's an especially good campsite for a large group with a beach landing, lots of flat open ground, lots of places for tents. I did have a big animal in camp overnight that I have to assume was a moose, but I will never know. Since it rained all night, I was really thankful to whoever went before me. They put some dry tinder in the fire ring and covered it. And another good reminder, you know, to build that good karma and always leave a campsite better than you found it, because I sure appreciated the folks who did that for me. The only portage on this trip that really caused me trouble was the one between Shawanabis and Boulder Lake. Both the Friends of Wabakimi and the Wabakimi Outfitters map showed a possible portage around a beaver slough and a main portage then after that. I wasn't able to find that first one, and it could have been user error, or it could be that it's not there anymore. But the water was too shallow to paddle, so I ended up bushwhacking to the longer portage. And along the way, I came across this old snowshoe frame, which was kind of neat, but it was a very wet, unpleasant slog. The main portage itself was in good shape, but it did actually have water actively running on parts of it, so that might be one that could need maintenance in future years. This site at Boulder Lake ended up being tied for my favorite. The train was finally out of earshot, the rain stopped, the wind stopped, and it was on this just little bay hidden inside of a peninsula, and really the first bit of true calm and quiet of the trip, which is why I was there. On day 4, I made the Kopka River. There were 3 mid to long portages that were well maintained, and a really fun paddle through a sedge meadow. Here, just before the Kopka proper, there's a little beaver dam that required a lift over that I probably wouldn't have mentioned if it weren't for the pretty picture. On the river, I turned upstream to the right here for a side trip and had to wade some swifts right away. The water was really low that year, as I assume everybody else experienced. After another moderate and then a very short portage, I was on Hook Lake. This time the wind was against me, but I made it to the far end of the campsite that was tied for probably my favorite of the trip with one before. As I said in the report on the website, the collection of rapids and trees and islands there was almost comically beautiful. It was almost like a landscape architect with a really absurdly romantic view of nature, just put everything in these spots to make it the way it was. I liked it enough that I used a layover day there. It was windy again, so I didn't do too much paddling, but caught a few fish, read, and just enjoyed being away from it and being there. On my way out the next day, I found an abandoned flying outpost on the north side of the lake, and I was personally selfishly glad it was abandoned because it was nice not to have to share the spot. The wind kicked up again, as it did almost every day, but again was really favorable. I lucked out in that regard. So not here, but just the next portage down here at the bottom of a long portage on the flowing part of the Kopka. I had my one big misadventure. When I loaded my canoe backwards and had it positioned such that it was, I couldn't turn it around in the water, but rather than unpack, I tried to climb over my stuff and almost made it, but not quite. I ended up capsizing, and thankfully it was, some ado about not too much, but it was a really good lesson in humility and just another reminder that you should do things right because, even in the most benign situations, they can turn serious really quickly. For better and for worse, my phone was a casualty, so I wasn't able to take any photos the rest of the trip. So the photos from here on are from my friends who went ahead of me that I'm using with their permission. I paddled down a lake that I will mispronounce because there's too many consonants in a row for me, but Kenakskaniss to a really nice site. It was cold and windy that evening, so I didn't get to use it to its fullest potential, but a nice site. I'd been told by some friends that the rest of my trip would be portage hell, and I was also told by Bruce that the next few miles were the reason for doing this trip. The falls on the Kopka were spectacular, and even more so because I had them to myself. However, the portages were challenging. I go through them one by one in my report, but one of them, for instance, had several boulder fields that would be a serious challenge had they been wet. Another requires a use of a ladder made of jack pine to get over a steep cliff. And there were several with some very steep descents where you had a choice between simply a steep scramble or ropes and a steep scramble. In one case, I'd say that other than making it longer, it's about as challenging as a portage that I think would be passable on a trip that was meant to be fun. Bottom line, I'd say that this section is just stunning, and it's like nothing I'd personally experienced on a paddling trip. But again, I would only suggest it for someone who's fit, has some experience, is comfortable with bad footing, and or is with folks who fit the description. The geology here is really stark and unique, especially for paddling country. The first lake I camped on almost sort of had the vibe of a quarry with vertical cliffs with faults and just this deep black water. To this point in the trip, I had gotten just a handful of mosquito bites and was really happy that it had been pretty much bug-free. But I did get a couple bites the first night in the falls area that I had an allergic reaction to, and they became painful and quite frankly gross. Thankfully, Bruce and Vince said that they'd never seen anything like that before, so it shouldn't dissuade you from going to the park. Due to the weather forecast, the need to replace my phone and feeling like I ought to do more than one portage and 2 short paddles in a day, I chose to cut the trip a day short. In retrospect, I have mixed feelings about that because I passed up some really wonderful spots, and I just should have been less excited to just make more miles, which is a mistake I rarely make. But anyway, I passed a few of these wonderful places. There was one more big steep portage, and I lined the last one before getting the island site on Whitewater Lake. That was just a really neat spot. Last day was rainy and pretty uneventful, with one portage to Mcgotti Lake where Vince met me with the transportation. That portage was well maintained, but it had some slippery rocks, and the campsites on either end were pretty well trashed. Vince got there early. I got there earlier and enjoyed talking to an indigenous man from Thunder Bay who was camped out there. And it was pretty cool to talk to a person whose stories of up north included encounters with polar bears. For me, that's beyond up north, but that was pretty cool. And I had a nice dinner, good night's sleep at the Wabakimi Outfitters Lodge, and a nice full day on Minnesota's North Shore before heading home. I did want to share that my first order of business was getting a new phone, and it was a really interesting experience to immediately immerse myself into the maze of strip malls and parking lots and Verizon stores of Duluth right after being alone in the wilderness for nearly 10 days, and gave me some real perspective that I try to kind of wax poetically about in my trip report. I'd sum up this trip just by saying that it may not be for everyone, and there might be some better alternatives. But if it is for you and you're up for it, it is absolutely amazing. And I'm not one for using superlative words. It was a really wonderful once in a lifetime experience. But for the one portage that I couldn't find, so can't really comment on, the portages and campsites were all in remarkably good shape. The maps I used were accurate, and there was a lot of solitude, which was what I was really after. I would recommend doing your research, and if you haven't been there before, I'd agree with what Joe said last week. I think it's worth using an outfitter. I'd also be bringing a waterproof camera on my next trip, and I don't care much for technology in the wilderness, but my inReach was a really great comfort to me and for my family back home as well. I put more stuff in my trip report, and I'm happy to be in touch with anyone planning a trip. Feel free to email me at the address on this slide. And I'm definitely plotting my return for next year. I may just try to go a little bit earlier to have some longer days. I went the week after Labor Day, the first and second week of September, and the days were just a little bit short. I probably will bring some of my own equipment next year. I think we'll also get outfitted by Bruce at Wabakimi Outfitters again. As ever, the other big reason, a big lesson that I relearned was just to make decisions. The Latvian mountain climber Ed Viersters has this great quote that a successful expedition isn't measured by whether or not you reach the summit, but whether or not you make it back home. And I felt like I did both. So with that, I'll hand it back, but do want to again extend my gratitude to friends of Wabakimi, folks like Bruce, folks like Phil, who I never got to meet, and everyone who has had a role in protecting this and all the other wonderful places that we still get to enjoy. So thank you.
Are there any questions for Rob? We have time for a couple. What was your favorite part of the trip?
Oh, it's hard to say. I think those two campsites that I mentioned were really my favorites, and for different reasons. One, because of just the quiet, just the absolute quiet in a way that you can, it's hard to find. And then even when you find it, you need time to let it sink in. And there was just that moment when it happened, and that was wonderful. And that second site, for very different reasons, it was a playground of little paths to walk to one viewpoint more pretty than the next, fishing holes. And it was just, but I think just being in a wild place like that, there wasn't really a singular moment. It was just a really great, wonderful trip.
We have a question. Did you do the goat portage on the Kopka? It sounds like you did.
Well, there was only one time where there was an option, so I don't know if I skipped the goat one or not. But indeed, yeah, a couple of them would be well named the goat portage. The one that I did skip was on the Kopka River in the waterfalls section. There's one on river left that supposedly has ropes, and then one on river right that just has this steep scramble down a boulder field. I did the latter, not the ropes. I did when I was putting in at Shawanabis Outpost, there was a group, a couple that was leaving, and they had come up. Not having done it, I can't really recommend one versus the other, but based on my experience, other than getting it out of the way early, I think I would probably much prefer to go downstream the way I went and go down those steep scrambles, not up.
Okay. We have another question. What stood out as differences between this solo trip and your earlier trips with other people?
Yeah, I've always fantasized about doing a solo. I'm not ridiculously experienced, but I'm glad I waited till I was experienced enough to feel comfortable doing it, and being outside, having wilderness skills, that sort of thing. But it's, I like the camaraderie of a group trip, and I'll do those again, and that's probably what I'll do next year. But just being alone with your thoughts is a really neat thing. I mean, when was the last time any of us didn't see another person, for 9-10 days? Maybe pretty recently, given what's happened in the last, year and a half. But when you're doing it for fun, it's just a different experience, and it's really hard maybe for me to articulate what it was, but it's legitimately different. And I think I would highly recommend, if you're comfortable doing it, I would just recommend finding it.
Okay, Rob, thank you so much.
Sure.
It's great to actually see you for the first time in person.
Likewise. And I will try to stop sharing my screen, but
Okay.
if one of you can do it for me, feel free.
All right. And I think we have Paul Dano with us. John Holmes apparently got knocked out by the power. So I was looking forward to his report. So it's Jeff and Julie Dano, right? Jeff, are you with us?
Okay. So yeah, my name's Jeff Dano. My wife Julie is here with me as well. And yeah, we want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be involved in this evening. Just to give you a little bit of background about us, we're both recently retired. I'm retired from policing and Julie's retired from child protection work. We retired just around the time COVID hit, so it was a good time to leave. We've been doing canoe tripping, mostly flat water, for about well, at least 30 years. One of our first longer trips together was actually on our honeymoon just over 30 years ago. So most of our trips, or all of them, have been in Ontario a lot. We live near Algonquin Park, so we pretty much covered that entire park by canoe. A lot of central Ontario, northern Ontario, and in the northwest as well. Oddly enough, most of our trips have kind of been all around Wabakini, but this year we changed that. This was the first time that we went into the park. We've been to Quetico. We did a trip north of Nakina last year, so kind of to the east of it and kind of to the southwest of it. But our original plan actually was to do a trip very similar to what Rob just described, the Kopka River. And our reason for that was kind of twofold. Our neighbors did a trip there last summer. And we also, it seems to be a popular spot in the park as far as YouTube videos go and things of that nature. So some of the research that we did certainly brought our attention to that river system. However, just given the dates that we had available to go, and the fact I guess the train schedule was altered here, or because of COVID, that wasn't in the books. So the train just wasn't available for the time that we needed to go, because we were going to do the train drop off. So we hemmed and hawed about whether we were going to go at all to the park, but we decided we would. So we did some research, joined the Friends of Wabakimi, obviously got the maps, got the guidebook, started to researching that, and we came up with a plan for a trip. Kind of what interested us, or mostly, is obviously the remoteness of the park, the fishing, and the fact that you can do a longer trip combining whitewater and or some river trip or river and lake travel. We were looking in the 10 to 12 day range. So we wanted to average about 15 to 20 kilometers a day. And just having said that, I noticed in my trip summary there that there was an error on the length of the trip. I think I put 270 kilometers. It's actually 170 kilometers. I didn't realize that. I don't know if there's any way to change that or not, or if it's even worth changing. But so yeah, we went the end of July, beginning of August of this summer. We live in Bancroft, which is basically the south end of Algonquin Park in Ontario. It's about 1,600 kilometers from here to Armstrong. So we, instead of killing ourselves, we did a 2-day trip, and we stayed overnight in Armstrong, our first evening at the McKenzie Lake Inn. Now, as anybody who did any kind of outdoor activity in the northwestern part of the province this year, it was pretty much a blaze. So we were even kind of down to the wire. We weren't certain whether we were able to go or not. We were keeping an eye on this forest fire map on a daily basis leading up to the time, and including the days that we drove up. And as you can see from that map, just that little section there where Wabakimi is located, for some reason, wasn't on fire. I know this is quite a ways away, but this is kind of the best I could do. So our trip, we started at Mcgotti Lake, which is southwest of Armstrong. We used the shuttle service through Clem Quenville. Basically, we drove to his residence, left our vehicle there, unloaded our gear into his truck. He drove us down to the access point, and then a day or two before we were supposed to finish our trip, he shuttled our vehicle to the end point for us. So part of this trip was the same as Rob. So we started down here. I don't know if everybody can see my cursor or not, but Mcgotti Lake, up the lake. I'm just basically, without describing it all in great detail here, because it is in the trip summary, but up through Boulder Lake, over the height of land at the tracks. And then we went up the west arm of Smoothrock Lake into Outlet Bay, and then down the Berg River where it joins the Ogoki River, and the Ogoki River into Whitewater Lake, and then around the north portion of Whitewater Lake, down the down the east side, and through McKinley Lake, Laurent Lake, and then back into Smoothrock, and then down through the Caribou River and across the top of Caribou Lake, finishing at the Little Caribou Lake. Now, as far as maps and things of that nature, I mean, we had obviously the maps that we obtained from the Friends of Wabakimi. They were they came in very handy. We also had some printed and downloaded versions of topographical maps. I used the paddle planner site, which was the first time I ever used it. And that was quite helpful. Also, because there's no cell coverage there, obviously, I downloaded a bunch of maps from called maps.me. Now those maps are helpful, although I did notice that for the first time ever, a portion of the park didn't have maps that you could download for that area. We didn't take a lot of photographs, kind of for a different reason than Rob. We had normally we rely on just a digital camera, but this year we took our cell phones. We had all the battery backup packs. We had solar, but we forgot one critical piece, a little adapter in our vehicle to power all those devices up while we were out there. So we used them sparingly, because I did have some, I did have paper maps, but we also wanted the option to have access to maps that were on the phone as well. As far as communications, we had a spot messenger, which is a great little device. Oops, let's go. Trying to advance to the next picture, but it doesn't want to do it for me.
Stop sharing.
I'm just trying to advance to the next picture, but it just doesn't want to do it for me.
Oh, there you
go. That's no.
There
Right, I guess I got to do it manually. There we go. Okay, so this is basically this is the road into Mcgotti Lake. We knew that this was washed out, but Clem had a full-size pickup truck, which was able to get us through without any issues. This is just a short video of us going through the washout, but it's essentially him. It was good and deep.
It looks like it.
But as they say, all part of the adventure. So this is the access point at Mcgotti Lake. So this is the beginning of the trip, which is actually at a time when we didn't realize we had forgotten our little accessory to charge our phones. This is our first campsite. Was not an actual site that was on one of the maps. So we ended up just kind of improvising. It was a little rocky outcropping on a smaller lake. It wasn't the greatest site, but this is, as you find when you camp in the boreal part of Ontario, this is usually what you get, is a rocky outcropping surrounded by some jack. So a few more days into it, we're now on, if I'm going to pronounce it correctly here, Shawanabis Lake. We camped kind of up in the northwest corner, not too far from the train tracks. It was a beautiful sight. Yeah, I mean, the train really wasn't, I think it went by once when we were there. So it was caught some walleye right out the shore. That's the same campsite, I believe. This is the Portage, and like Rob said, it looked both ways. This was, now we're a few more days into it. We're down on Spring Lake into the trip. Fairly shallow water there. And like I mentioned before at the beginning there with the forest fire, we did have several days near the beginning of the trip where there was quite heavy smoke, enough that it was irritating to the throat. Fortunately, the wind changed, became more northerly or easterly for the latter part of the trip, so that kind of cleared that issue up for us. This is one of the friends we made on the Smoothrock Lake section up near the very end. It was a bald eagle that came down to get a fish carcass off the shoreline for us. One of the many, many eagles we saw on the trip. And we're now at the end of Smoothrock Lake at Outlet Bay, it's called. Now this campsite, now it looks fairly obvious here because once you do find it, it is pretty obvious, but it was actually fairly difficult to find just with the shoreline being heavily vegetated. It did take us a little bit to find this spot. Now I guess I could comment on just on some of the campsites kind of leading up to this point. There were lots of sites available. Obviously we didn't see that many people on this trip. But there was a few that we couldn't find that were on the maps and that we just couldn't locate. And again, really the only time that was an issue, I think, was on our first night. We were able to find sites after that. Portages, for the most part, were, I was actually expecting them to be worse than they were. They were, for the most part, they were reasonably easy to find and navigate. Some of them had been recently trimmed, especially earlier on in the trip. It's obvious someone had gone through with a chainsaw, cleared out some of the larger blowdowns, which was, we certainly appreciated that. We did some trimming on a number of the portages, just some of the smaller stuff where it was necessary, just with a hand saw. Most of the other blowdowns were kind of ground level stuff, so you could just simply step over them. Again, this is, yeah, this I believe is also in Outlet Bay. So from there, from Outlet Bay, we did the portage into the Berg River. The Berg River was a very nice section of the trip. There was a number of portages that are listed on the map where they say you can portage, but we ran a number of those rapids, even in a fully loaded boat with, that's really not a whitewater boat, but we were able to get through them without any issue. Water levels were decent enough that you could do that, which was nice. So this is where the Berg River gets into the Ogoki River. This particular section of the river was quite shallow, surprisingly shallow actually. And it was just upriver from where it flows into or enters into Whitewater Lake. And that's another shot of the Ogoki River campsite. This is part of the portage going from the Ogoki River into Whitewater Lake. There's a lodge there on the lake, Whitewater Lodge or Whitewater Lake Lodge, I believe it's called. It was not in use with COVID. There's clearly nobody had been there in some time. All the boats were still flipped over. But this was part of the portage, which was actually, even though it looks in pretty rough shape, sometimes it's better than crawling over down trees. So it was a nice surprise. That's the where the Ogoki flows into Whitewater. And for the fishermen out there that are listening, it's a great place to fish for walleyes, right where the Ogoki spills into Whitewater Lake in that rapid section. It was pretty much nonstop walleye fishing there. This is, so once we got into Whitewater Lake, we basically just paddled up to the north end of it, and we camped about midway on the northern portion of the lake where it kind of narrows down a bit. It was a lovely campsite. This was one of the spots where we actually ran into other people. And I should say, I guess we did bump into another a group of 2 on Smoothwater Lake. Actually, a pair of guys from Waterloo, Ontario. And then we also saw a group of 4, 2 couples at the end of the portage from the Ogoki River into Whitewater Lake. They were going in the opposite direction. They were going upriver on the Ogoki, then upriver on the Berg. Here we had a visit from 3 Indigenous people who were staying at a small community at the other end of Whitewater Lake. Near the portage that goes out into McKinley Lake. They were actually fishing out in front of our campsite. They were jigging and had set some gill nets in the narrows. They did invite us actually back for a coffee, but it was a long paddle for us. They were in a motorboat. This was one of the, I mean, not this particular shot, but the one nice thing about what we found very nice about Whitewater Lake was I don't know how many people have been on there, but there's some really nice beaches, natural beaches on Whitewater Lake. Some of them are much, much larger than this one. We just happened to stop at this one because it was kind of a sheltered little cove. Yeah, so if you like lakes with natural beaches, it's definitely one to consider. And pretty much any beach that we stopped on Whitewater Lake, we saw animal tracks, whether it would be caribou, moose, bear, or wolf. And this was the only, we were hoping to see caribou. We never did. This is as close as we got. Again, another shot of one of the beaches. As you can see in the foreground there, there's lots of tracks from moose and caribou on that particular beach. This is the campsite at the northeast corner of McKinley Lake. So this is after this series of portages coming from Whitewater Lake into McKinley Lake. This was the I'd say the worst portage that we've had on the whole trip, because a fire had gone through. I don't know how many years ago, but certainly enough that the regrowth was substantial. And I didn't realize this at the time. I was able to find, because the original portage I think went around on the west side of the river system or the creek system that flows between the two lakes, and we kind of bushwhacked that first section, and it brings you out into a little pond. And from that pond to McKinley Lake was unaffected by the fire, so it was fine. But then it kind of was at that point when I started looking back that I noticed that it looks like other people had, when they came off of Whitewater Lake, they kind of went on the east side, and then they just went over the height of land, and it kind of just takes you into that little pond, and then they paddled over to the west side to carry on the easy section. So I did put that in my my trip summary. Again, this is the campsite on McKinley, the one we stayed at. We're now into Lonebreast Bay, which is again part of Smoothrock Lake. Wasn't a lot of campsites through that section of the lake. The one that we did find obviously was quite nice. That's it there. And we're now on the Caribou River, which was the only campsite that had a picnic table, if you want to call it that. It was nice to put light things on. You wouldn't want to put anything heavy on it. And that's where we ended the trip. Was at Little Caribou Lake, where our vehicle was waiting. So we had planned on, I believe it was 10. I planned on we actually finished a day early. because we were on the Caribou River there. We were only about 3 hours or 3-4 hours from the end of the trip, and given the weather forecast, which was calling for lots of rain and stuff like that, we decided just to kind of bail out. Now we I know one of the reasons I like to go to these remote places is the fishing, so I can comment on the fishing. It was excellent for both walleye and pike. We rely on fish pretty much the majority of our meals, our main meal in the evening, and we didn't really have any issues with that, getting our fish to eat. As far as wildlife sightings, we didn't see more moose. We did see one mature bull. Only one on the entire trip, and it was on Lonebreast Bay, I believe. We saw one black bear. Was greeted by him at the end of one of the portages. I think it was up McKinley Lake way. We saw several river otters. We saw some pelicans, obviously bald eagles, things of that nature. Didn't see any caribou, didn't see any wolves, but certainly saw evidence that they exist up there, that's for sure. Lots of tracks. Most of the fishing we did was most of the good fishing was in the current areas. We also trolled a number of, on the main lakes, along shoals and things of that nature. And this particular year, the blueberries were fabulous, so we ate lots of blueberries. Yeah. So yeah, that's it, unless somebody's got some questions. I mean, we didn't, as far as major issues, we didn't really have any. It was uneventful in the sense of any kind of disastrous things happening. Like I say, most part the portages were easy to find and certainly doable.
So that you took that was a fairly long trip. So were you paddling hard every day?
Not really. I think it averages about 15 to 20 kilometers a day.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah.
We have a question. How much gear did you carry? Did you single portage or double portage?
How much gear did we carry? Well, we try to carry as little as we can, and we rely on fish. So, but we always have a backup meal or two, of course. So we have basically on our trips, we have one big pack each, and then a smaller kind of day pack with just stuff you want to quickly, a waterproof pack that you want to quickly access equipment. And we double carried.
I go over once.
Yeah, Julie goes over once, I go over twice. I used to be able to do it all at once, but my back doesn't want me to do that anymore.
Yeah.
That's really the reason why.
And what was the date of your trip again?
We started on the 31st of July, and I think we came out on the 10th of August.
Okay, so the smoke was bad even very at that time.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely, yeah. But like I say, the wind, I think our savior was the wind direction. It changed for us, and if the wind was out of the west, yeah, it was very smoky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a challenge for some people this year. And August was a terrible time for some of that smoke.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Somebody asked, is the route okay for a Kevlar canoe, or should a Royal X be used?
No, I mean, no, that's a the Kevlar canoe is fine. That's the Surrey River, it's a 42-pound canoe. Yeah, pretty thin. So, the portages are there. If anything is ugly looking, the portages are available to you, but it was no issue there.
We ran some of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it sounds like you had a great trip. John Holmes still has his power out, so it doesn't look like he's going to join us tonight. We'll have to figure out how to reschedule John for a future trip report. We have one more question. How were the bugs?
The bugs?
They weren't bad.
Yeah, I don't remember being an issue. Yeah, no, I don't even think we took bug jackets, but I don't even think we put them on.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll move on. I'm going to talk about my report now. I'm going to try and share my screen.
Okay.
Okay, Rob has a comment.
Well, that was just further reflection on one of the questions. So
Yeah.
don't let it distract.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, I need to be able to share my screen.
You should be a co-host, Dave.
Okay, share screen. Host disabled, participant share screen.
Oh, well, I'll put you, I don't remember doing that, but I'm not being passive aggressive here. I gotta find you.
It's okay, Berg.
There you go.
All right, okay. I think that's it. All right, how does that, if you can see
Yes,
my screen okay?
yes.
Now, I look at these really long trips that people do and I go, wow, that looks like a lot of fun. And like, well, I think I'm going to take a little bit shorter trip. So my trip started September 7th and went to the 16th. I did a fairly short route, but one that I like to take my time, and I'm not a real fast portager. I'm very careful on portages, especially those rocky, slippery things. And I'm not trying, whatever I do, I'm trying to keep from falling and hurting myself. And I was tripping with my daughter, Brianna, and she's my favorite canoe partner. I've had many other canoe partners. Bill Pyle's another one of my favorites, but it's hard to beat my daughter. She's just so enthusiastic, and she is a biologist, and I got the bug from many years of canoe tripping in the boundary waters in Quetico. So we also used Clem Quenville, and he shuttled us up Trail Lake Road. And of course, there's some debate about Trail Lake Road. And there's a fork to Tamarack Lake, and I'm not sure that fork is actually called Trail Lake Road. And there's this sign here that looks foreboding that's basically says unauthorized use, but people are using this road. So the outfitters use it. Clem, as a White Sands Nation member, I think, has indigenous rights to use the road. And this is what the road looks like. And of course, some of you have been up it, but it's just a gravel, dirt, bush road, and it didn't have any of those gnarly washouts like Rob encountered. And I'm always curious about these routes and these portages, and the portage into Tamarack Lake, very well used. In fact, it has two starting points and it merges and you get down to the lake. And over here to the left, there's actually a little Wabakimi Provincial Park sign on a tree. And there's a cached boat. It's hard to know whose cached boat that is, but there it is. And that's the first of a number of cached boats that we encountered. And so we headed out in the rain, found a one-star campsite, and passed up the really good campsite. And there were there were two canoes with 4 people that passed us a little after we'd set up camp, and we were able to tell them the really good campsite that we didn't take was just around the corner. And those were a couple of folks outfitted by Bruce Heyer. And so there's not a lot to write home about there. But then next day we headed up Tamarack Lake to the Bright Sand River. Bright Sand River is really a very small river, especially at low water. And where it says swifts, that just means it's a narrow channel that your canoe will barely fit through a rock garden. So not a lot of water, but very pretty. And you go up a little further, and it's not on the FOW map, but it's on Lawrence Mills maps. It's a beautiful campsite, and we decided to stay there. It's got nice landing. It's got a rock ledge over here to the right where there's a good place for fire. There's up on a rise. There's a a nice area for camping and a back behind. So there's multiple camps, tent spots, just beautiful spot. Of course, this had to be the one spot where I was walking up a hill and with my heavy pack on without a paddle to stabilize myself. And I took a bad, I slipped and fell really bad. Fortunately, I didn't hurt myself, but that was my one major mishap of the trip. Next day we went over the 482 meter portage again, a little more challenging because it had a little up and down, but there weren't any step overs or any obstructions. It was a really nice portage, and then we put on our trolling gear and caught some fish and had fish dinner. And in the morning the next day, we had fish cakes, which is one of my favorites. There was a campsite on an island at the very bottom of Smoothrock Lake as you come out of the bay from the Boiling Sands River, which is a wonderful campsite. It's a 5-star campsite, and we stayed there for two nights. Spent a day just paddling around and taking it easy and building fires and fishing. We weren't catching any fish right there, but the scenery was wonderful. So that's very serene. The next day we headed out on day 5. Smoothrock Lake, even down there at the bottom, it's a fairly large lake, and there was wind and waves and just enough to make me a little on edge. And then we made it down to this long south arm down into the Lookout River, down of Smoothrock Lake, and then there's a nice channel over to the Lookout River, and it's a really pretty channel. And right where the Lookout River comes into Smoothrock Lake, it was a very pretty spot with lots of color. And that's the 1147 meter portage, which is 3/4 of a mile. Beautiful level portage with about 20 step overs, lots of evidence of past portage clearing work, probably by the park crew and others. And there's campsites at both ends of the long portage. For me, that was one of the big challenges, just carrying this portage. It's a long ways with a canoe and the packs, and so it took us. So we camped at the far end of the south west end of the portage, and then we stayed there for 2 nights, and then we fished Spring Lake. We had a layover day. It was mostly, we were up in the north part of the lake. We saw pine marten, our one of our major wildlife things. We didn't see any moose. We didn't see any caribou. The Friends map shows a structure in the North Bay, but all we could see was the remains of an old rotting dock. We found where the fish were, and we trolled back and forth, and there was this one spot where every time we passed over, we'd get another bite. So that was lots of fun, and we had lots of fish. That fish lasted us for like about 3 days after that. Cold fish. And then we went on down the next day, this Lookout River. Like Paul was saying, portages are nice and clear. They're well marked. They're not too difficult. It's mostly pool and drop. And a lot of water coming down the Lookout River, even in early September. And I imagine in the spring, it's probably just roaring. But there's this one portage around this beautiful falls right here, and then there's just lots of little sections like this where there's a pool and drop and some nice, lovely water coming down. We camped at the top of one of the last portages going southwest, and there's a lake right before Onamakwash Lake, and I guess I call it North Onamakwash. And we just camped at there was a nice campsite at the far end, and we just set up there. There's supposed to be another campsite around the corner in a little bay, but we never actually saw that. We had an experience with a short, brief, but intense downpour. So I'm a believer in these CCS tarps, and I can tell you one thing. I think that what somebody once said, there's never a tarp that's too big. I think this is an 8 by 10, but I think, you know, an even bigger tarp is always a good idea. So we had nice sitting logs, a nice fireplace, just a beautiful spot. My daughter went for a swim. It was really cold, but that's the kind of gal she is. She'll just jump right in and swim as much as you can until it gets so cold you have to get out. Ken Babinchak, if he's still with us, says it's pronounced Onamakawash, so I'm always mispronouncing it. On this and some of the other portages, we saw some fresh saw cuts. It might have been the work of Jeff and Julie, who went through before we did. I tried to do some cutting too, and I'll tell you, it's a lot of work to cut through those logs, and I'm wondering if I have the right saw, if I shouldn't have a heavier duty saw with a little bit bigger bit to it. So I think that's a future discussion, is what's the best boreal saw to carry along. If you're not carrying a chainsaw, you need some good equipment to take out some of these obstructions, especially the ones that are like chest high and like totally in the way. So at the end of our trip, we paddled down Onamakawash Lake, and it was a big lake, but not too windy. We stopped for lunch on this little island, and I think that's a caribou footprint. And then there was this curious semicircle dug in the sand, and I'm not sure what that is or what caused that, but it was kind of odd. There was a campsite right around the other side of that little island from us. And then we just paddled up that last little corner of Onamakawash Lake to where there's a whole bunch of little cabins, and it took us a little while to figure out where Schultz's trail was. We paddled all the way up to the end. I never did see the alleged portage that Rob took to cross over from Shawanabis, but I know it was there. I think it was on the left side of it, but I didn't really see it. Anyway, we were looking for Schultz's trail. Finally figured out that Schultz's trail is right here, and there's this little cabin is really a wreck and a mess inside. There's another little cabin structure over here that's kind of locked up that looks like it's in much better shape. This little storage shed had the bolt knocked off, and then so the trail goes right up through the middle of the two cabins, then on up to the train tracks. So it took us a little while to figure that out. So we just camped right below here the night before the train was supposed to arrive on that, I believe. I'm trying to remember now. I think it was a Thursday morning. And train, we had my wife tracking the train for us and sending us messages via our inReach to let us know where it was, and so we had some idea where the train was, but it still came about an hour before I actually expected it based on that. And we were expecting to, they didn't check our ticket. I had a ticket for both of us, and I understood we were supposed to give them money for the canoe, and they never asked for it. I was ready to give them $100 Canadian, but they didn't ask for it. And you get on the train, and next thing you know, you go by this little community of Collins, and you see all the little houses there. And we made it back to Armstrong, and Clem had shuttled our car down, and it was just sitting there waiting for us when we got off the train, and had a nice trip. And then we drove back to Armstrong and stayed at Debbie and Sandy Sargent's place, and had a great time there too. So be glad to. I knew Rob was traveling north of us at the same time, and I think I sent you a few inReach messages. You know, would have been fun to bump into actually somebody I knew out there. But so, does anybody have any questions for me? Yeah, Vern commented on my fry pan because Vern likes big fry pans, right, Vern?
Yeah, big heavy fry pans. Hey, Dave, if nobody has a question for you, could you give us an update on the fundraising effort, where we stand on that for our project with the park?
We're at about $7,500 Canadian. Our goal is 8,000. We had another contribution come in today. So we need just a few more to make our goal. So I think we'll be able to conclude the campaign probably by next week. That's the plan anyway. Beth Rouse asked, does it work to take a hammock to Wabakimi? I'm not sure I'd be the right person to answer that. I think I'd be skeptical. You probably could make it work, but lots of times there aren't enough trees that can support the weight or the right configuration. I didn't see any footprints around that little oval in the sand, so I was just puzzled by what that was. Yeah. So that's my report. Another fun trip, and I have a YouTube video and a report on the website as well.
And our next presentation, again, is December 19th. It's with Evan McCall, and it's Park Stewardship at Wabakimi. And we're very fortunate that the Assistant Park Superintendent is going to do a presentation for us. So I think it's a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about how the park is managed and actually meet some of the park staff. We've had a great working relationship with the park staff. There's only 3 of them, and only one of them's full time. So it's amazing. An area of that size has a very small number of people that is responsible for it. I think you'll enjoy Evan. He's quite an adventurer, and he's got some great stories to tell. And he hopefully is going to share some of the work that we helped fundraise for last year, which was removing legacy debris from 4 major lake systems in the park. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. He had some great stories to share with it, and I can't wait to see the images of that work being done. So that's December 19th at 7 p.m. Dave, do you have anything else you want to add?
Just that well, we missed John Holmes tonight because of his power outage, and he has a very well done report. It's on our trip report for him. So
we will find a way to reschedule him.
Right, and we appreciate the trip presenters who used the trip report form that Mary Jean's expedition committee put together. I think that helps tease out some of the really good information that we're getting.
Right. Well, and with that said, be thinking about your trips next summer. If you'd like to be on the webinar next winter, document it, photograph it, and put a little PowerPoint together, and we'll give you a venue to share your story a year from now.
Yeah, thanks.
With that, we'll call it an evening. Thank you all.